Before I tell you what happened that day on the rooftop, I need you to do one thing. Subscribe. Because if you leave before the end of this story, you'll miss the single moment that changed not just my life, but the life of the man I am about to tell you about. And I promise you, what he asked of me in return for saying yes will haunt you for days. Stay with me until the very last second. I was on my knees. The cold concrete of the rooftop bit into my skin through the silk of my gown. Below me, Lagos moved like a restless beast, traffic choking the streets, yellow danfos coughing black smoke into the afternoon air, horns blaring in frustration. From up there, the city looked like a living organism, pulsing with greed, hunger, and the thousand tiny dreams that kept people awake at night. But all I saw in that moment was him. His clothes were rags, his hair unwashed. He had the kind of eyes that made you wonder if they had seen too much or nothing at all. His skin carried the sunburn of days spent under the punishing Lagos heat, his hands scarred from work I couldn't imagine. And there I was, a billionaire. The woman who owned half the glass towers in Victoria Island. The woman whose name opened bank vaults and closed corporate deals. The woman in a custom diamond necklace worth more than the combined salaries of everyone who had served me breakfast that morning. Begging a man who had nothing, to marry me. I remember how the wind caught the ends of my gown, lifting it just slightly as if the city itself was holding its breath. My voice trembled. My heartbeat was an angry drum in my chest. My knees were already numb, but I didn't dare move. I thought about everything that had brought me here. The nights I cried into Egyptian cotton sheets in a penthouse no one else slept in. The days I walked into boardrooms where every man wore the same smug look, as if my wealth was some accident that had happened to me, rather than something I had built with blood. I thought about my son, my little boy, the only pure thing left in my life, and how his eyes had started to look like mine, haunted by something no child should know. And I thought about how this man, this stranger, was my last chance. But let me start from the beginning. Because no one kneels in front of a homeless man on a Lagos rooftop without a story that eats away at the bones. The first time I truly understood what it meant to be alone, it wasn't in the poverty I was born into. It was years later, when I was already rich beyond my wildest imagination. I had been a single mother for 6 years, raising my son with the kind of fierce protectiveness that only women who have been abandoned understand. My days were board meetings and negotiations. My nights were rooftop dinners and charity galas where cameras flashed and people whispered. My wardrobe was imported silk, my heels were custom Italian, and my perfumes came in bottles that looked like art. And yet, the loneliness in my chest was a weight I carried everywhere. In Lagos, money doesn't buy you love. It buys you an audience. People who will laugh too loudly at your jokes, nod too eagerly at your opinions, and vanish the moment your power fades. I had learned to smile through it. To pretend I didn't notice when the men who came into my life wanted the money first, my heart second, if at all. The truth? I was tired. Tired of being seen as a prize to be won or an empire to be conquered. Tired of being strong because there was no one else to be strong for me. It was on a late August afternoon that everything shifted. I had driven myself that day, something I almost never did. The Range Rover's leather seat felt too soft under me, the tinted glass too dark for the harsh glare of the sun bouncing off the high rises of Ikoyi. I remember the traffic was brutal even for Lagos. A sea of cars locked in place, horns screaming like wounded animals. My air conditioner hummed softly while outside. Street hawkers weaved between vehicles selling gala sausage rolls, chilled sachets of water, and fake designer sunglasses. And then I saw him. He was leaning against the edge of a median, head bent as if the weight of the sky was too much. His clothes were torn, his shoes barely holding together. In the heat that made the rest of us sweat through our expensive fabrics, he didn't move. It wasn't pity that made me stop the car. It was something else, something sharp and unexplainable that pulled at my chest. I don't know why I asked my driver to follow him the next day. I don't know why I watched from a distance for weeks, learning the rhythm of his days, where he slept, how he ate, how he avoided the world. It was madness. But then, my life was already falling apart. 3 weeks later, my company's biggest deal collapsed overnight. A partner I had trusted betrayed me, siphoning funds into an offshore account and leaving me to face the fallout. The board started circling like vultures. My son's school began asking questions about his father. Questions I couldn't answer without reopening wounds that had barely healed. And the loneliness, it grew claws. By the time I found myself on that rooftop with him, I had already made my decision. The rooftop wasn't planned. We had ended up there by accident, climbing the broken stairwell of an abandoned building that once housed one of my early startup offices. The air was heavy with the smell of rain-soaked concrete and rust. From that height, the city looked almost beautiful. The chaos softened by distance, the sounds muted, the poverty invisible. And that was when I did it. I sank to my knees. The silk of my gown clung to the damp surface. My diamond necklace caught the weak sunlight and threw it back into the world. I told him I wanted him to marry me. Not because of love. Not yet. Not because I thought he could save me. But because somewhere deep inside, I knew he was the only one who could give me the thing I had been searching for all my life. I didn't know what he would say. I didn't know that his answer, and the price he would demand, would shake me in ways I was not prepared for. That was the day my story truly began. And if you think this is just about a billionaire saving a homeless man, or a homeless man rescuing a lonely woman, you're wrong. It's about the spaces between love and survival. About the ways betrayal can hide in kindness. And about the one thing that even billions of naira cannot buy. Before I take you deeper, before I tell you what made me fall to my knees that day, subscribe. Because this is the part of the story where I show you the truth. The truth that money is a stage light that blinds you to the shadows gathering at the edges. If you don't stay until the end, you'll never understand why a woman like me, with everything, would throw herself into the arms of a man who had nothing. I didn't inherit my billions. I wasn't born into the manicured estates of Banana Island or the quiet luxury of Ikoyi. I was born in a one-room face-my-face-you compound in Ajagunal, where the air was thick with the smell of frying akra in the mornings and open gutters in the afternoons. My earliest memories were of heat, the kind that pressed against your skin and made the nights restless. My mother sold vegetables in the market, her hands always smelling faintly of onions and earth. My father, well, he was a story I was told but never met. From the beginning, I knew that survival depended on speed. The speed to see opportunities before others, to move before the door closed, to run before the flood came. By the time I was 22, I had already clawed my way into the center of Lagos' relentless economy. I started small, a kiosk selling phone accessories on a noisy corner in Ikeja. My stock was cheap and my profit margins thin, but I learned something there that no business school could teach. In Lagos, people buy trust before they buy products. Every naira I earned was reinvested. Every mistake I made became a lesson I couldn't afford to forget. And then one day I stumbled into the world that would make me rich. Property. It started with a single rundown duplex in Surulere. The walls were peeling, the plumbing was a mess, and the roof leaked. But I saw what no one else saw. Its location, its potential, the quiet way the neighborhood was beginning to change. I borrowed more than I could safely repay, renovated with the stubbornness of someone who refused to fail, and sold it for a profit that made my hands shake when I counted it. That was the first brick in my empire. In the years that followed, I built towers where old bungalows once stood. I turned forgotten warehouses into luxury lofts. I negotiated deals in rooms where I was the only woman, and the youngest by decades. Lagos became my chessboard. The bridges of Third Mainland were veins carrying my lifeblood, workers, tenants, contractors, investors. I knew the pulse of Victoria Island's nightlife and the whispering undercurrent of its business deals. By 30, I was a billionaire. My name appeared in magazines, my face on the covers. My penthouse looked out over the lagoon. The city stretched beneath me like a jewel box scattered with lights. And yet, I was alone. The father of my son was a chapter one had long since closed, though the wound still bled in places no one could see. He had come into my life during the years when my wealth was just beginning to rise. A man who wore charm like a tailored suit and carried promises in his smile. But promises are cheap in Lagos. They cost nothing to give and everything to believe. He left without warning, disappearing into another woman's life and another city. I was left with a child in my arms and the taste of betrayal in my mouth. I promised myself I would never beg for love again. But money has a way of attracting the wrong kind of attention. The suitors who came after him were predictable. They dressed well, drove the latest SUVs, and spoke of futures that sounded suspiciously like investment pitches. Even the men who claimed to want nothing from me eventually found ways to take my time, my energy, my trust. There was one man, a businessman with ties in oil and shipping, who I thought might be different. He knew my worth beyond my balance sheet. Or so I believed. When the betrayal came, it was quiet but devastating. He had used my name, my company, and my trust to secure loans he never intended to repay. The day I discovered it, I was sitting in my office, staring at a stack of papers that felt like a verdict. That was the day I learned that the richer you are, the sharper the knives. The loneliness grew heavier after that. I would stand on my penthouse balcony at night, watching the red taillights snake along Eco Bridge, the hum of the city below like the heartbeat of something alive and restless. My son would be asleep, his small form curled under blankets in a room decorated with toys he rarely touched. I had surrounded us with beauty, Italian marble floors, art flown in from Paris, furniture that arrived in crates from Milan. But beauty without safety is a prison made of glass. The breaking point came in a single week. First, the largest development deal in my company's history collapsed. A trusted partner, someone I had worked with for years, siphoned funds into offshore accounts. The news hit the papers before I could control the narrative. Then my son's school called. They had noticed his grades slipping, his mood darkening. He had gotten into a fight. The reason? Another child had mocked him, saying his mother bought love the way she bought buildings. It was the first time I realized my son was carrying my battles on his small shoulders. That night, I drove without destination. The city blurred past, the neon lights of Lekki clubs, the sprawling markets of Balagan still alive with late-night bargaining, the street musicians under the Falomo Bridge singing for coins. And then I saw him. The man from the median. The same one I had glimpsed weeks before, leaning against concrete like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Only now he was sitting cross-legged on the edge of an empty parking lot, his gaze fixed on something far away. There was something about him, not pity, not attraction, but a pull, a sense that he existed entirely outside the world I knew, and yet carried a truth I had been searching for without even realizing it. I began to watch him. Not in a way that felt safe, but in a way that felt inevitable. For weeks I followed from a distance. I learned his routes, his habits, the quiet dignity with which he navigated his invisibility. And slowly, a dangerous thought began to take root. What if I stepped outside the world I had built? What if the safety I was looking for was in the hands of someone who had nothing to lose? I didn't know it yet, but the answer to that question would lead me to that rooftop. And to the moment when I offered him something even my billions couldn't protect me from. Before I tell you what he asked of me, subscribe. Because once I say it, you'll never forget it, and you might even hate me for agreeing. Stay until the last second, because the truth about this man will twist the ground beneath your feet. I thought I knew what I was doing that day on the rooftop. I thought my offer was the risk, the leap into something wild, raw, and dangerous. But what he asked for in return was something no amount of wealth could soften. The days after that rooftop moment blurred together. I returned to my penthouse, to the marble floors that caught the Lagos morning light, to the balcony where the lagoon reflected the clouds like a dark mirror. But everything felt different. I began to see the city through his absence. The broken sidewalks, the men sleeping under flyovers, the way the towers of Victoria Island cast long shadows over the streets below. I had spent years building my life upward, higher, brighter. And now I was looking down. I didn't see him again for almost a week. When I did, he was sitting under the awning of a closed shop in Yaba, the late afternoon sun painting his face in gold and shadow. He didn't look surprised to see me. But he didn't smile either. I had imagined that the days leading up to his answer would be full of uncertainty. Instead, there was something terrifyingly calm about him. And when he finally spoke, when he finally told me what he wanted, it was nothing like I expected. He didn't want my money. He didn't want my cars, my penthouse, my company shares. He didn't even want a promise of love. What he wanted was my surrender. Not in the way men sometimes say that word, not as a weapon to strip me of my independence. No, he wanted me to surrender everything I used to protect myself from the world. He said, in his own quiet way, that I would have to live as he lived. To give up the walls of glass and steel that separated me from the city. To sleep where he slept. Eat what he ate. Walk the streets as he walked them. For 1 year. It sounded insane. I had spent my life escaping the hunger, the danger, the unpredictability of the streets. I had fought for safety, for stability, for control. And here was this man, this stranger, telling me that the only way he would agree to marry me was if I stripped myself bare of all of it. A year without security. A year without comfort. A year where my wealth would mean nothing. At first I thought it was pride, some attempt to prove that I wasn't buying him. But as I looked at him, I realized it was something else. He wanted me to understand his life before I tried to bring him into mine. He wanted me to meet him on equal ground. And the truth was, I was afraid. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, the city lights spilling into my room. My son was asleep down the hall, his breathing soft and steady. I thought about what this would mean. The risk, the exposure, the vulnerability. Could I leave him behind for a year? Could I trust my empire to survive without my hands guiding it? Could I walk the streets again, not as the woman whose name commanded respect, but as just another shadow among millions? The more I thought about it, the more I realized something brutal. For all my wealth, I was still trapped. Not in poverty, but in fear. Fear of losing what I had built. Fear of being seen without the armor of power. Fear of returning to the girl I had once been. And maybe he was offering me a way out of that prison. I didn't give him my answer immediately. Instead, I began to follow him more openly. I watched him navigate the streets with an ease that made me feel like a foreigner in my own city. He seemed to know every shortcut, every market woman, every street child who would wave when he passed. He lived in places the city forgot, under bridges, in half-collapsed buildings, in the back rooms of shops closed for the night. He shared his food without hesitation, even when there was almost nothing to share. He carried no phone, no wallet, nothing that could be stolen. And yet he seemed freer than anyone I had ever met. One evening, I followed him to the rooftop of an abandoned hotel. The sun was setting over the lagoon, the sky a violent mix of orange and crimson. From up there, Lagos looked like a city breathing, expanding and contracting, restless and alive. He sat at the edge, legs dangling over the drop, and I realized that for him this wasn't just survival. This was choice. And that terrified me even more than the idea of losing my wealth. It took me 2 weeks to decide. 2 weeks of watching my reflection in glass towers and wondering what it would look like without the diamonds, without the silk, without the certainty of tomorrow. 2 weeks of thinking about my son, about the life I wanted him to see, about the woman I wanted him to remember me as. And then one night I found myself back on that first rooftop, the place where I had begged him. The wind was cold, carrying the smell of the lagoon. The city lights flickered in the distance like restless stars. And I knew my answer. I would do it. I would give up everything for 1 year. I would step into his world not as a rescuer but as an equal. But I also knew that when the year ended, nothing, not my life, not my heart, not my empire, would ever be the same. Before I tell you how it ended, subscribe. Because this isn't just the end of a story, it's the end of the person I used to be. And the final twist will make you question everything you thought you knew about love, sacrifice, and truth. Stay until the very last second. I left my penthouse at dawn. The sun was only beginning to bleed across the horizon, the streets still wearing the last breath of night. The marble floors of my home were cold under my bare feet as I walked through it one last time. The art on the walls, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the scent of perfume still lingering in the air. I kissed my son while he slept. I didn't tell him I was going. Some truths are too heavy for children to carry before their time. And then I stepped out into Lagos, not as the woman who owned half its skyline, but as a woman with nothing in her pockets. The first days were brutal. The city, stripped of the tinted windows and private drivers, was louder, harsher, more alive than I remembered. The smell of roasting suya on street corners mixed with the acrid smoke of burning refuse. My feet ached from walking distances I had never noticed before. He didn't slow down for me. We slept in places that didn't deserve the word. Under bridges where the roar of traffic became a kind of lullaby. On hard concrete floors of abandoned buildings, the sound of rats in the corners a constant reminder of where I was. I learned to make food stretch beyond reason. To trade favors for shelter. To bathe with a single bucket of water, the cold biting into my skin. And slowly, the woman who once measured life in boardroom victories began to measure it in small mercies. A dry blanket, a safe corner, a shared loaf of bread. I thought I would hate him for this. I thought I would resent the hunger, the cold, the filth. Instead, I began to see him. Not just the man in front of me, but the world through his eyes. He knew every unspoken rule of the streets. Which market women would give you food if you swept in front of their stalls. Which night watchman would turn a blind eye if you stayed quiet. He gave without keeping score, even when there was nothing left to give. And in those quiet, unguarded moments, the ones without words, I felt something growing between us. Not the desperate, glittering romance of the rich. Not the transactional affections I had grown used to. Something older. Something truer. Months passed. My hair grew wild, my skin darkened under the sun. My hands, once soft from years of luxury, grew calloused. My body thinned, but my spirit, paradoxically, grew heavier and lighter at the same time. I learned what it meant to be invisible. To have people look through you as if you didn't exist. To have your presence tolerated only if you stayed out of the way. And yet, in that invisibility I found freedom. No one expected anything from me. No one wanted to take from me. One night, during the Harmattan season, we found shelter in the shell of a half-built hotel on the outskirts of the city. The wind howled through its unfinished halls and the cold sank deep into my bones. He shared his only blanket with me, his body a barrier against the wind. I remember staring into the darkness, my mind strangely quiet, and realizing that I loved him. Not for what he could give me. Not for what he could be. But for the way he had stripped me down to my truest self, and still chosen to stay beside me. By the 9th month I stopped thinking of my old life. The penthouse, the cars, the glass towers, they felt like memories of someone else. But time has a way of moving faster when you stop watching it, and before I knew it, the year was almost over. That's when he told me his secret. We were on the rooftop of a derelict building in Victoria Island, the skyline glittering in the distance. He told me that he had once been rich, richer than me, that he had lost it all not to bad business, but to betrayal by the very people he had built his empire for. He had walked away from it, choosing the streets over the poison of false loyalty. And when I came to him begging for marriage, he hadn't seen a desperate billionaire. He had seen himself. The year had been his test. Not of whether I could live like him, but whether I could live without the illusions he had once mistaken for love and loyalty. When the year ended, I was ready to go back. Not because I missed the wealth, but because I wanted my son to know both versions of me. The woman who could build an empire and the woman who could survive without it. I asked him if he would come with me. And that was when the final twist came. He said no. He told me he couldn't return to that world, not even for me. That the cost of wealth, the constant battle for trust, the way it changes the people around you, was too high. He loved me. But he loved the version of me I had become more than the life I was returning to. So we stood there on that rooftop, the city below us alive with lights and noise, and we said goodbye without saying a word. I returned to my penthouse. My son ran into my arms. My companies welcomed me back like a queen returning to her throne. But every night I stand on the balcony looking out at the streets, wondering if he's somewhere down there, moving through the city like a shadow, carrying the year we shared in the quiet of his heart. And I know that in some way he still has me. Because no matter how high I climb, a part of me will always belong to the streets where I learned that love isn't something you buy. Something you surrender to.